Here I'm in San Marco with the author Robin Saikia to talk about Robin and his lovely new book, which is Drink and Think Venice. It's out now from Blue Guides, £12.95 in the UK, available from all the usual stores. And Robin, I have to start off by saying, you've lived in Venice for how long?
I think on and off. I first came to the city in 1968.
As a kid?
As a kid.
Yeah.
And I think every year of my life, with a couple of exceptions, I've spent 2 or 3 weeks here. And then a decade or so ago, I decided to spend more time here. So I'm deeply immersed in the fabric of the city.
So you basically became addicted at the age of 6?
Yes, 6 or 7. I remember, I think I recount this in the book, falling in love with the church of San Giacomo dell'Orio after an argument with my mother about pizza and ice cream. And I remember making, as an only child only can, I remember making friends with this wonderful green marble pillar that was looted, I think, from Constantinople. And it's a marvellous piece in the church. D'Annunzio likens it to a petrified forest. And to me, that was the first emblem of Venice that I carried away with me. It remains a symbol of my love for the city.
And did you always think, one day I'm going to move and live here?
Absolutely. When I wrote my book about the Venice Lido, the fashionable beach resort, that was, I think, 15, 20 years ago. And it was quite well reviewed by The Guardian.
It's a lovely book. It's very amusing and very kind of unpredictable. I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you, David. I was trying in the Venice Lido, as I have tried in Drink and Think Venice, to present a rather more penetrating and unusual view of the city, something distinct from the tidal wave of touristic and repetitive information that we usually get from conventional guidebooks.
To me, it's like, even after 30 years, I still get lost in Venice. And reading your books is a bit like getting lost in Venice because you never know what's going to be around the next corner. I mean, you can go from talking about a wonderful drink to a composer or an artist. It reflects the richness of the city and the extraordinary texture of it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. There is always a surprise. And the city is so easily navigable and livable in. It isn't daunting in the same way that Rome or Milan might be daunting. It's friendly. It's a small town when you want it to be. And it's a big, glamorous international city when you want it to be, depending on your mood.
Yes. It always strikes me that one of the things that forces it upon Venice is the fact that there are no cars. There are no bikes. You can only get somewhere by walking or by taking a vaporetto, and it makes everything work on a human scale, I think.
Yes, it does. I'm often amused by the fact that I haven't entirely lost my childhood innocence. I'm always very excited at the idea of crossing the road when I go to the Lido, or taking the bus to the Panorama supermarket at Marghera, and realizing that this is how the rest of the world lives, mindful of cars, mindful of traffic jams, mindful of all that stress and congestion that these things bring.
The idea of Drink, Think, Venice, is it something you've been working on for years?
I would say the gestation period dates back to 1977 exactly, when we were on a school trip from Winchester with our art master Graham Drew, who was preparing us for art history A-level. And on the last night, 2 of us stayed behind. We had to catch flights to somewhere else from the rest of the crew. And so we were left alone in the Pensione Seguso, which is still around. And Graham said, behave well. There are 3 things you shouldn't do. Don't go to Harry's bar. Don't drink grappa, and don't go to the Lido. And so you can imagine how we spent that evening.
You just had to decide which order you went.
Yeah. And so that was my baptism of fire when it came to drinks in Venice, and the thinks very shortly followed. I mean, I came, as one does, with a variety of companions over the years in my 20s, 30s and 40s. And I began to discover the hidden corners of the city, the culture of drinking, which is civilized and relaxed and very carefully paced here. I think north of the Alps, we tend to scurry out to pubs in Soho or Munich and get completely sloshed. Whereas here, there is a more andante pace.
And obviously, you write about Harry's Bar and some very upmarket places, but you also cover the kiosk at Piazzale Roma. There's a whole range of places in there that each have their own attraction.
And particularly that bar that you and I both like, Chen's, as I call it.
Yes.
The Chinese, the Blue Bar.
Yes, just opposite San Sebastiano.
It is arguably completely the other end of the spectrum from Harry's, but no less an important part of the Venetian experience. And what I've tried to do in this book is to mix up the hyper luxury, such as the wonderful Bar Longhi at the Gritty Palace, and Harry's, obviously, with bars like Chen's and the Chioschetto on Saturday, which are ordinary spit and sawdust places.
Given you know so many places, how on earth do you decide which one you're going to go to?
Well, I had some quite gentlemanly arguments with my publisher about this. We started off with 50, so we had to sort of cut that in half. And obviously, of the 26 places that I've chosen, there are another 200 that I could easily...
Wow. So this could be an endless series, really, couldn't it?
It could be an endless series, and it might not necessarily be restricted to Venice. One thinks about Trieste or Verona or anywhere that's quite near to us.
And when you wander out for a drink, what's your favourite?
I would probably say Spritz Select. Probably my adopted drink. As I've said in the chapter on spritz, I've suggested that people drink their spritzes sitting at the bar of the Villa Laguna on the Lido, because you can see the sunset beautifully over the city from that distant prospect.
Well, that's right by the Vaporetto store.
Yeah. Years ago, I always used to drink Campari for the simple reason that I love there used to be these neon lights. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I remember them on the Lido.
Yeah. I mean, then they took them away. There was part of a sort of very draconian process with the Soprintendenza, where they stripped the city of its too obvious advertising mark. A good thing on the whole, but there were casualties, such as that ironic Campari.
I remember my very first book 25 years ago, I stayed mostly on the Lido, and I used to love seeing that sign as you came back from the city across to the Lido, the big red Campari sign. It was a work of art.
It was a work of art. I still dream about it. It burns brightly in my dreams. I love it. But coming back to Select, I have prejudices. I think Aperol is a lovely drink, but it's far too sweet for me. Campari is far too bitter. Cynar has this sort of medicinal feel to it, rather like those hangover pick-me-up drinks. What are they called?
Fernet Branca and that.
Fernet Branca, typical one. Whereas Select, what I loved was the 1950s advertising, which shows this very civilized-looking chap raising a glass, and he's got a load of canalettos behind him, and he's in a little palazzo or whatever. It says Select, the drink for the connoisseur. So it's a no-brainer. I have to stick with it. And it's great because, seriously, it's not as bitter as Campari and it's not as sweet as Aperol. It's got a nice balance.
I remember when I first came here, locals were surprised when a foreigner turned up and drank spritz, because 25, 30 years ago, spritz wasn't heard of really outside of Venice. Now it's all over the world, which I suppose is kind of indicative of the way Venice has changed greatly. A lot of things have stayed the same, but then a lot of things haven't. How do you feel about that? Because I know that you don't feel tourism is the devil that it's sometimes painted.
I've spent a lot of time in bigger cities. I've lived in London for most of my life. I've spent time in Paris and New York, extended periods of time. And I often say to my Venetian friends, my more conservative Venetian friends, they don't know how lucky they are my first visit in 1968. We're sitting here now in 2023, 24. The pace of change has been very slow, in my opinion. The whole thing could have been far worse than it is. And I do think that the infrastructure of the city is second to none. The guys who clear up the trash in the mornings.
We're one of the cleanest cities in the world.
Exactly. And considering the annual footfall, which is hovering at around 25 million a year, I think it's marvellous. Some disadvantages, the explosion of ugly-looking retail on the ground floor. But these are, in my view, small prices to pay when you consider that the city has retained its visual integrity. And the Venetians have not really sold themselves out. There is a strong element of original Venetian culture, particularly in the peripheral backwaters that you and I are both familiar with.
Obviously, there's an issue with housing. Well, that's not unique to Venice. But one thing I've noticed over 20 years is that the actual quality of life in some ways has improved a lot. 20 years ago, all my friends in Rome said, why do you go to Venice? The food's terrible. The quality of the restaurants and the service, and I think of hotels as well, has improved an awful lot.
It's a great deal better than it used to be. I think it doesn't quite have the competitive edge of Milan or Florence, by which I mean that the Venetians are rather gentlemanly in this respect. They're not cutting each other's throats. In Florence, for example, every restaurant is competing to be better and cheaper than everywhere else. That is, in a way, a good thing. And we're seeing more of that in Venice. There is more variety on offer, even though on the cuisine it's comparatively limited. But then that in itself is no bad.
The old Venice did go to bed very, very early, didn't it?
Yeah. And a great many of the younger visitors to the city still complain about that. They consider that the sort of unofficial curfew now, which is what, shall we say, 11 o'clock, where, I mean, the city puts itself to bed at 10:30, 11, maybe midnight. Younger people think that is pretty odd because they're used to, again, Paris, Berlin, Madrid, where you can party till 3 or 4 in the morning. You can do that here, but in a limited number of places. And obviously, Campo Santa Margherita, we've got Bifora open till 2 or 3. In my book, I've got Time's Social Bar, which keeps very late hours. Nice place because it's quiet. It's up in Cannareggia. Yeah. But these places are few and far between.
So what next? You've got this book out. Are you going to plan something similar or something totally different?
My current task is to update my Venice Lido book for a second edition because parts of it are slightly out of date now. But nothing too drastic. The central historical core of that will remain the same, but I need to expand a little more on what you can do on the Lido now, how it's changed.
And the Hotel des Bains is just shuttered for over a decade now, isn't it?
I think one needs to draw the veil of charity over that and see what happens. But for me, the Excelsior is the one. It's the one hotel that is actually on the beach.
And extraordinary architecture as well.
It's marvellous, yes. Sadly, they gave him a sort of blank check to do exactly what he wanted. So he created this incredible Moorish extravaganza. The concept being that it should remind people of all these spas in Constantinople, Baden-Baden, that had a vaguely oriental feel to them. And what I noticed, I clocked in the other day, and they've reinstated all these sort of colonial wicker chairs, palm tree things in the lobby, which is huge and high. And that's exactly how it was in the 20s and 30s. It's a step in the right direction. It had been getting a little too modernistic, but it's a superb place.
There's just so much to see and do here that every time I go back home, I think I meant to do that and I never got around to it.
It's extraordinary how people don't plan their visits. Yeah. I often, in a very, very gentlemanly way, give tourists advice. People are completely bewildered. They don't know how to get around. It's clear that they've done absolutely no research. This, more than any other city, I would say, in Europe, needs research. It's extraordinary how many disappointed people you see here. Have you noticed that?
I've had people say to me, I went to Venice and I hated it. And I said, well, where did you go? We went to the Piazza San Marco and we went to the Rialto. And that was it. On the plane coming out, there was a couple next to me. And I asked them what they were going to do. And they said, we're going to have a gondola ride. And I said, have you not planned anything else? I said, well, we're only there for 2 days. And I thought, well, if you're only there for 2 days, that's all the more reason to plan. But they had absolutely no idea. They had not heard of the Piazza San Marco. And you think, why would you want to come if you've not got any idea why you're going? It is very, very odd. I think it's become a destination for people to tick off. And they do the Piazza San Marco, Rialto, and a gondola ride, and that's it. They've done Venice.
And also, they probably have this subliminal idea, whether they realize it or not, that Venice is such an enchanted place that it will do it all for them.
Yes.
That they don't need to do any work.
Mm.
That somehow the magic will communicate itself without any
which it won't.
From them. No, it won't.
No, but nowhere in the world will do that.
Yes, there's this graffito on a little bridge leading to Piazza di Roma. I first saw it 15 years ago and photographed it. This guy is stenciled in black spray paint. I want my money back. It's always struck me as being incredibly amusing. I mean, it's still there as a kind of eternal monument to the crushing disappointment that some people feel.
There will always be some people who are disappointed, but I think if I drink and think Venice beforehand, they should at least have a good libation and learn a lot of history along the way. Thanks very much for talking. It's always good to see you.